Hey, hi everyone. So today we are going to cover deploying JasperReports Server application in cluster mode using Docker Compose. Okay. So in this video tutorial, we will be covering three scenarios. Okay. One is for deploying JasperReports Server application in cluster mode with Postgres. We will be using Postgres database and deployed in Docker using the default database. Default database means we will be deploying the internal container database. Okay. Second scenario will be deploying JasperReports Server application in cluster mode with Postgres using external database. And the third scenario will be deploying JasperReports Server application in cluster mode with Postgres using external database with externalizing DB parameters. So now let's start with the first agenda, which will be deploying the JRS application using default database. Okay. So for that, this is the repository which you need to click and okay. And here, so these are the prerequisites you need to have this setup in your system in order to proceed with the installation. These are the installer setup. Just need to clone this repository into your machine wherever you want to install this application, and then just follow and run these scripts. So it will make your system ready for the deployment. So now let's come to the building the images. So for this, in order to build the images, we need to update two files. One is .env and other one is default master.properties. Okay. So here we will be needing two images. One is Jasper Server Web App and Jasper Server Buildomatic. Okay. If you want to get into more details about how to build the images for this application, please watch our video for creating Docker images for JasperReports Server, where we have explained how to create images for all these scenarios. Okay. So now let's come to the first part. So here, since we are using internal database here, so make sure DB host value should be your repository host name. Okay. So let's see. And where we need to update the DB host value, it needs to be updated in under Docker JRS resources and default master.properties. Okay. So here, see. So for me, we will be using internal database. So since I am using deploying it on a Docker desktop on my local system, so I have updated it with host.docker.internal. Okay. So in your case, you have to update it with your repository host name wherever you want to deploy. Okay. And the other file is .env file. So here you just need to make sure the version numbers and the image name should be appropriate. Okay. And so once you are done with the changes, then you just need to build the images using Docker Compose build. Okay. So here I already have both the images present in my system, which is Jasper Server Web App and Jasper Server Buildomatic. So let's proceed further for the configuration and the deployment of the application. So again, here we are using Docker Compose, but you can also build the image using Docker CLI just by following these commands and the steps mentioned in the README. Okay. So now let's proceed with the keystore generation. So for keystore generation, you need to get your JasperReports Server probe bin file into your system, and then under the Buildomatic default master.properties file, you have to enable this app server type to skip app server check. Okay. And then save it. So that's all required from that. And then you just need to run this command js and genconfig. Okay. So let me just show you. So this is my JasperReports Server probe bin under Buildomatic to the default master.properties. And here just need to enable this app server type to skip app server check. Okay. And that's all. And then just run the command js and genconfig. Okay. So it will create the keystore into your local user home folders and then from there you have to and the key store will be present with a name .jrsks and .jrsksp, and from there you have to copy the key stores and place it into your JS Docker tunnel. So let me go back to my Jaspersoft container repository directory. Jaspersoft containers Docker JS. So here you have to place your key store files into resources key store folder. Okay. So and then okay, so that's all for the key store generation. However, since we have used it using JasperReports Server installer, so you can also use it using Docker Sierra, Docker Run. So just follow these steps and it will create and you get the your key stores. Okay, so now let's come to the repository setup. So here for repository setup, we need to run it using the Jasper Server build-o-matic image. Okay, so it will deploy all the required schemas, metadata required for your application into your database. Okay. So now let's run it. So it's pulling the Postgres image and then it will deploy a container and then it will run the build-o-matic script to make the database ready for the application. Okay, so it will take some time. So let's wait for its completion and then we can proceed for the installation of the application. So now the build-o-matic has been completed, execution is completed. So let's proceed for the next step. So we have our repository setup. So here we have done using Docker Compose. However, you can also use it using Docker Run just by following these steps. Okay. So now we are good for the deploying the server application. So in order to deploy the server application, first you have to get your obtain license file, and then you have to place it under this file path. Okay. So here under resources, license, you have to place your obtain license file, and then we can then to deploy the application. So since we are using Docker cluster, so you have to use it using cluster docker compose.yaml files. So in this cluster docker compose.yaml file, so this is the docker compose file which we will be using for deploying the application. So here you can see the container. So Jasper Server web container configuration is deployed. It will be deployed with the name using this image, and here under Java ops, this one, the Jasper Server cache.jms provider, you have to make sure like it should be the name of your container, ActiveMQ container. Okay, so that will be working as a JMS for you. These are volumes defined, and here we have defined for the number of replicas to 2. If you require, you can update it as per your need, and it will depend on ActiveMQ. So unless until ActiveMQ container is up and running, this container will not be deployed. Okay. And HA proxy, here we will be using HA proxy for load balancing our cluster. So our application nodes. So HA proxy will be used for that purpose, and it will be working on port 80. So now let's deploy our application. So Docker Compose. Okay, so it will start deploying it. So it will take a couple of minutes. So let's wait for it, the deployment completion, and then let's see what's the state of our containers. So now the deployment has been completed. So let's see the state of the containers and what containers are getting deployed. See, the first one is HA proxy. So it's deployed and state is up, working on port 80. 2 nodes, since we have defined the replicas for 2. So 2 JRS, the web application containers will be deployed, 1 and 2, and both are up and running. ActiveMQ container is also up and running, and Postgres we have deployed. So now let's check if the application is working fine, it's deployed successfully or not. So okay, so it looks good. It will take a couple of minutes for the application to get started. So let's wait for it, and then we can see accessing the application if it's working or not. Okay. Okay, so now the container is up and running. So let's go to the browser and try accessing the application, and let's see if we are able to access it or not. So we will be accessing it using as a proxy load balancer. So, and since it's running on port 80, so that's why we're accessing it using localhost Jasper Server Pro. So now we are able to access the application. So you are good to go, and you can start using the application for. Okay. Okay. So now let's go for the agenda 2, where we will be deploying the application using external database. Here's, as we are using external database, so you need to update your repository hostname in the DB host section for under this default master.properties file. Okay. So let me show you. So let's go to resources, default properties, default master.properties. And here you just need to update your DB host with your external repository which you want to use. Okay. And then just build the images using Docker Compose build. So I already have both the images handy with me. So now let's proceed for the key store generation. So for key store generation, the steps will be the same, which we have covered in agenda 1. Okay. You can go through it and then just follow those steps and you will be able to do it. So now let's come for the repository setup. So for repository setup, we need to run the Jasper server buildomatic. But here, firstly, we need to comment out this one, the repository default Postgres repository part, which from the Docker Compose. So here, since we are using external database, so we will not be depending on the local repository which will be deployed. So we have to comment out that part depends on part from the docker compose.yaml, and then we comment it out for because now it's not required because we will be using repository database. If you here after that, you can also comment out this repository part because we will not be needing it since we are using externally. And under the Jasper server buildomatic containers, we just need to comment out this depends on section because now we will be using external database. So this it should not depends on the local repository. Okay. So now so we have commented out everything that is not needed and then save it. Now run this Jasper server buildomatic. See, it's creating the network and then it started deploying, running the buildomatic on my external database, which we have just configured under default master.properties. So it will take a couple of minutes to get it run and then wait for it. Also see, here it's using DB host to the host name which I have provided for the external host name. So let's wait for its completion and then let's see proceed with the deployment of the application.
Yeah, so now the build has been completed. So now let's move for the deployment of our web application. So here for deploying the web application, firstly, you have to take your obtained license file and place it under resources license folder, just like I did here. And once you place your license file, then you are good to deploy your web application containers. So which we will be deploying using Docker cluster compose.yaml file. Okay. So now we have so this using this this is the cluster one. So now we have to deploy it using this docker compose.yaml file. So I have already explained the details of docker compose.yaml. So now let's run it. Okay, so it's pulling the repositories. Sorry, it's pulling the images for ActiveMQ and it's a proxy. So let's wait for a couple of minutes for the completion and then we'll see the state of the application. Okay, so our containers have been deployed now. So let's check the state of our pod, the containers, if they are up and running. Oh, sorry. No. Yes. Okay, so now see, the repository container is not here because we are using external repository. So the HA proxy is deployed, and it's up and running. Jaspersoft web app, 2 nodes are deployed, it's up and running, and ActiveMQ is deployed, and it's up and running. Okay, so now let's see the logs and check whether the application is running started properly, or there is something discrepancy is occurring. See the logs. So, okay, so our application is up and running. So, okay, so now let's try accessing the web application using the web browser. So this is the URL using which we will be accessing it. Oh, okay, so we are able to access the application and it's running perfectly fine. So now we are done with agenda 2. So now let's move with agenda 3.
So now let's start with our third agenda, which we will be deploying JasperReports Server application in cluster mode with Postgres using external database with externalizing DB parameters. Okay. So for this, we will be needing 3 changes. Okay. So one change we will be needing under this env file. Okay. So here you need to add these 5 parameters, which is db host, db port, db name, db username, and db password. So under db host, since it will be on external database, so you need to add the external database IP. So for us, which will be the host IP or the host name of the external DB on which you want to you want to use for your application deployment. Okay. So here we have passed the DB host, DB port, DB name, DB username, DB password. And the second change which is required, which is under the default master properties file, which is under resources default properties. Okay, so here under DB host, JSDB name, DB username, and DB password, you need to pass the variable name which you have set in your env file. And the third customization is needed under the docker compose.yaml file. Okay, and cluster docker compose.yaml. So here under your Jasper Server web app environment variable under Java ops, you need to pass these values db host, db port, db name, db username, and db password with the name of the variable which you have set in your default masters.properties file. Okay, so once and same applies on the docker compose.yaml as well. So here under Java ops, you need to add these values. Okay, and once it's done, then we are good to, and then under the Jasper Server customization folder, you need to add this web apps folder. Under that, Jasper Server Pro, under Jasper Server Pro, meta-env, and then you have to get the context.xml file and place it here. So in case if you want to go through more details about how to create the images, then kindly go through our video, which we have already uploaded for creating Docker images for JasperReports Server. So there you will get the complete like step-by-step installation guide, like how to create the images for this case. So now let's proceed with the key store generation. Building image we have done. So for key store generation, we already have covered this scenario under agenda 1. So kindly go through that. You will get the steps on how to create the key store, and then you have to place it under resources key store folder on your Jaspersoft containers directory. So now let's proceed with repository setup. So for setting up the repository, you need to run this command, Docker Compose run Jasper Server Buildomatic. And also you need to comment out the depends on section under Docker Compose.yaml file because we are using external database, so we will not be needing it. So let's comment it out. Wherever depends on is set for the repository. So, and also let's comment this repository section because we will not be needing it. So now we are set with the changes. So let's run the Docker Compose buildomatic command to set up the repository. Compose run Jasper server buildomatic. So it will take a couple of minutes. Let's wait for its completion. So now the build has been completed, and as you can see, we are using external database. So node local container has been deployed for our repository Postgres. Okay. So now let's proceed with our application deployment. So before deploying the application, you need to place your opt-in license file under your resources license folder of your JS Docker Jaspersoft container repository. So once you place it, then we will be good to deploy the application using our cluster docker compose.yaml file. So now our containers are deployed. Now let's check the state of our containers. Docker PS. Okay, so HA proxy, it's up and running. Jasper Server Web App, 2 nodes are up and running. ActiveMQ is up and running. Okay, so let's see the logs first and check if our application is working properly. Docker logs. Okay, so our application service is started. So now let's try accessing the application. Now we will be accessing the application using localhost. Okay, so now we are able to access our application. Login. So the application is also up, running, and is accessible. So we are good to go, and then you can now good to use the application. So that's all. We have covered all the 3 agendas. So thank you and have a great day.